So just to kick this off, today we're going to be covering how to monitor trends, and that's keeping a pulse on what's important in the news that affects your audience, how to craft that sensitive messaging, and ensuring that your messaging is appropriate and contributes to the larger conversation. And then lastly, how to make campaigns that are authentic and sustainable. And so with monitoring trends, it's no secret that your audience should be an integral part of your social strategy. And because everyone has their own blind spots, it can be challenging to hit every touch point if you're not intentional about how you are monitoring social. And so to get started, you want to establish who your audience is and what communities they belong to. And many of us already have an idea of who we are appealing to, whether that's through your buyer personas or your current customers. And even if you don't have that established, it's pretty easy to look at your analytics and get an idea of the demographic that you serve. And once you do have this idea of your audience, you want to really look and do your research on their sub communities or what niches they are a part of, or the pain points that are relevant to them. For Design Pickle, we know that a lot of our customers are marketers and creators who are looking to, outsource their design needs. And so when I'm monitoring social media, I'm making sure that I'm looking into those creative communities and seeing what conversations they're being that they're having, or what strains may exist in our community or our industry. And once you identify that audience, you want to identify where they are most active. So for example, the younger generation may be on Twitter or Instagram, or Facebook has been appealing to a lot of older generations. So you just want to make sure that you are putting these messages in places that your audience will see them. And outside of your social feeds, I subscribe to news feeds, newsletters, and community groups. I get like the New York Times sent to my email daily. I subscribe to Blavity, which is a Black media tech organization that specifically serves Black millennials. And so you really want to make sure that what you are subscribing to is diverse, so that you are getting perspectives that you might not see on your regular social feeds. And then lastly, check your competitors. More often than not, they are also doing these same, they're also going through these same steps to monitor their audience. So see what they're talking about, how they're engaging with their audience, and take notes. And I also pulled this quote from Twitter's global director of community. And so we really want to make sure that we're recognizing, when we're doing our monitoring, we want to make sure that we're recognizing moments versus movements. And so the quote is, "While it seems like the entire world is paying attention to the fight for equality now, it's a battle that Black Americans have been fighting for centuries. It's important to recognize that this movement existed well before the recent protests and will live on long after. This community wants to know that you'll show up for them even when it's not popular to do so." And I pulled this quote because there's a lot of fads or trends that you'll notice when going through social media. And you need to recognize what's a fad and what's a movement. So for example, the Black Lives Matter movement is not a fad. It's not something that's going away, and it's not a struggle that is just now existing. So you want to make sure that when you are appealing to your audience and you are searching for content to put out, that you are doing so that is not in a performative way. You don't want to just put out a message, a one-time statement or something like that. You need to really be in tune with what is a movement, not just a one-time moment. And so we're going to move on, once you identify these movements or what you are appealing to, how to craft that messaging. And so the 3 steps in doing this is to recognize, craft, and deploy. And so first, you want to recognize your brand's role. And so it's natural in times of racial injustice or social unrest to feel a sense of urgency, but you really want to take a step back and determine what's your brand's place in all of this and what your audience is expecting from you. You don't want to, oddly fit yourself in a conversation, but instead search for ways that are authentic, so that what you have to add is sustainable. And it should also be rooted in your business and your values. And so once you determine your brand's place, you want to develop a position. Especially in times of social unrest and racial injustice, it's not enough to be neutral. Once you do develop this position, stand firm in it and craft messaging that is concise and clear. And then lastly, speak to your expertise. And so I pulled this example that Design Pickle crafted during the height of the racial protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder. And what we really tried to do with this message is um, state our position in the movement, and then also speak to how we felt in our industry. So if you, I'm not, oops, sorry. So I won't read this full message, but really, we really wanted to stand or make clear that where our place was in the creative industry and what we could do within this industry to make a difference. And so these are some questions to ask yourself to help you kind of make that position. And so the first question is, where in the conversation does it make sense for your brand to weigh in? For Design Pickle, with us being a creative services company, we had to really look at what resources we could provide to our creative community and where it made sense for us to speak up. And the next question is, what questions may your audience have and how can you provide insight? And so if you want to position yourself as a thought leader or as a resource, really research what your community or how you can be insightful and offer valuable information to your community. And then you should, think about what gaps in education your brand may have and how you can further your education. Because not every brand is an authority on race matters or different social justice matters. So you need to be, transparent and honest with yourself and seek opportunities to get more information. And then lastly, again, how can your brand be a resource to your community? How can you mobilize your platform, or how can you reach out to those in your industry to be a resource? For Design Pickle specifically, with us being the creative services company, we are able to put out visuals and offer design services to people within our industry that may need that help. And so this is an example of that. Pretty early on during the protest, we launched a campaign that really tried to help amplify and bring awareness to the different murders that were happening in regards to police brutality. So you see these different portraits of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. And this was just us using our resources to really help people gain more information about what was happening in the world, and then also use these images to create their own messages. We had a lot of people who were sharing these on their own platforms and really using this to help propel the conversation surrounding police brutality. And so when you are crafting your language, you want to avoid, again, performative allyship. It's like I said, it's not enough to put out a one-time statement and then not have any actual work to show for it. That is just surface level activism, and especially in the day of social media and with everybody having their platform, your audience will call you out on this, or will just look on it inauthentic. Again, you want to avoid tone-deaf language. Of course, when you're not part of a community or not directly affected by different things happening, it can be challenging to know what is tone-deaf, but you should be having conversations with different stakeholders in the community and doing your own due diligence and making sure that the messages that you are putting out are appropriate to who you're trying to appeal to and will be received in the way that you're intending. You want to avoid opportunistic selling. These different movements and pain points in your community are not an opportunity for you to sell a product. And if you are going to, of course, you're still going to sell your product, but if you're going to maybe consider, donating some of your sales or whatever you're doing, putting out that language and being transparent with your audience about your intentions. And then lastly, I would avoid fear-based content. With everything that's going on in the world, these can be very challenging times and people are scared, but you don't want to feed into those fears. You want to be more of an encouraging and uplifting space for your audience. And things that you do want to include in your language is representation. For Design Pickle specifically, I really wanted to make sure that our social media was reflective of the communities that we were trying to reach. So it's not enough to just have one perspective shown. You want to make sure that you are amplifying diverse voices. You always want to show more than you're telling. So that looks different for everybody, of course. But if your organization is doing volunteer work, maybe get some of those images in front of your social media. Or if you can provide resources, do that. If you're, donating money, of course, don't be boastful about it, but don't just put out a statement and not show your work behind it. Again, if you are able to educate your audience or give those resources, even if that's leading to another organization or another knowledge base, do that. And then lastly, authentic content. So that really just comes through with those different images and messages of what you're doing and how you're there to help. And then lastly, deploy and engage. So you do want to make that corporate statement, but you want to do more than that. So like I said, with Design Pickle, we released that first statement, making a stand with the Black Lives Matter movement, and then we launched campaigns. So we worked to partner with different organizations that were doing some of the groundwork for the Black Lives Matter movement. We continue to shed light on what's going on in the organization. And we also tried to make ourselves an ally to other creators in our industry. And that really ties in with prioritizing that representation. So even if you don't have that representation within your own organization, do what you can to reach out to others in your community and actively try to make sure that you're increasing representation for your brand. And then highlight your brand's actions and ongoing strategy. Like I said, everything that you put out should be rooted in your brand's values and actions. And so highlight this and show how you plan to sustain this impact. And then, of course, since the world is going to flex and things change, you always should be reevaluating your social strategy and adjusting. And so lastly, hitting on how to maintain that impact. You want to understand your brand's sphere of influence. And so the example that I have shown up, pulled up, is actually from Design Pickle's sister company that we recently launched called Fresh Stock. And Fresh Stock is a diverse library of stock vectors and templates with the mission of helping creators create things that are more reflective of the world around them. And so we have globally inclusive images, and we wanted to create a space for that community that really focused on having conversations and propelling that dialogue. So we knew that if we created a community group, we would be able to help facilitate some of those conversations surrounding diversity or pain points within the community or voids that the community might fill. So with your brand, seek out ways to further engage with your audience and understand or try to understand how you are able to, further those conversations. And I also just pulled some examples of other brands that have created sustainable campaigns from what's going on in the world. The first one that I grabbed was Glossier. They are a skin and makeup brand. And in May, they launched that they were committing over $1 million in donations for Black-owned beauty businesses. Of course, this is not something that every brand can do, but I just like how they laid out, they made not only the statement that they were going to donate that money, but they showed an actionable plan that their audience could check in with. And then there's a local community or a local bakery in Arizona that has made it a point to donate some of their proceeds to different initiatives and social funds. And so that is like a smaller scale thing that you can do, just putting your resources and your influence in a more sustainable manner. And so some questions to help inform your social strategy is, what is your current diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy? Is there something that you can build on this? And what positions have you taken and what exhortations were made? So if you did put out, your messaging, taking a stance for whatever cause, did you set expectations? Are there any actionable steps that you laid out that your audience may be following up on? And you want to make sure that you are following up. And how has your audience responded to your previous efforts? Did they express any areas of interest? For Design Pickle, we got a lot of engagement when we did our portrait campaign. And so that made me note that our audience likes to see when we amplify the voices or bring exposure to the different victims within these causes. And then lastly, are there existing messages or social practices that no longer align with your new strategy? So there may be things that you've done in the past that made sense for your brand then that no longer made sense, that may be insensitive now, or just may no longer really serve the intentions that you are now aligning yourself with, and that's fine. We're always going to learn and grow, but you need to audit your content, and if that's the case, don't be afraid to pull that and update or change direction completely. And so moving forward, you always want to ask questions. You always want to engage as much as you can with your community, and again, readjust your strategy if needed, and always seize opportunities to learn more. Always with your new strategies, prioritize those marginalized voices, and see what the content that you're putting out, how that affects them, or how that it will be received, and focus on those diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Again, we're gonna make mistakes all the time, but be transparent with your audience and be quick to make those mistakes. Be quick to correct those mistakes. All right, and so I will open the floor now to any questions. I flew through that, so if there's anything that you would like me to expand on or revisit, I am open.
And feel free to either drop any questions into the chat box or just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question if you do have one.
Hi, hi Tori. Thanks so much for the overview. That was really helpful. I just have one question. For people that aren't managing their social media full-time, for smaller businesses that are trying to do that on the side while they do everything else, I'm wondering how many hours per week someone should think about allocating to the social media platforms.
That's a great question. So for smaller businesses that maybe don't have a dedicated social media manager, I really recommend taking just a few minutes out of your morning to do those monitoring strategies, and maybe doing a little bit of brainstorm on how your week will look for social. Me personally, I take every morning just to audit our social media feeds and kind of like read those different like newsletters and things that I mentioned in the beginning. And that can really just, take 30 minutes or 15 minutes out of your day just to get like an understanding of the conversations that are being had. And then from there, especially considering that things change often, if you want to take, your social media strategy on a week by week basis and kind of just, maybe set an hour or two each week to plan out your social strategy, I think that's more than enough time.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Hi, Tori. This is Michelle. I did have a quick question because I know that you touched on small businesses. So how often would you suggest that they post content, maybe about these movements or just in general to keep their clients engaged?
Hi, Michelle. That is a question that would definitely differ from business to business. But I would recommend, so for Design Pickle specifically, I try to kind of allocate like one day each week that I was going to be posting about the police brutality protests in general, or specifically. And that is just the kind of, you want to keep a pretty consistent cadence when you are setting a campaign or really looking to amplify a certain cause. And so I don't think that there is any one answer for how often you should be posting, but if you are going to create a very specific campaign, or if you have different, goals or want to reach an audience, I would just maybe pick out a day each week or pick out a specific time and try to think about how long you can sustain that, and then do that same time or that same day for a certain amount of time so that your audience kind of like builds up an expectation for you or knows what to expect. Let me know if that answered your question.
It definitely did. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. Great content.
So I did get a question through that I see from Monica. She says, what do you consider the top 3 social media platforms to spend time on? For example, Instagram, Facebook, Google, etc.
Personally, I think that one, Twitter is a great place to monitor conversations and trending topics. And one of the best ways to really set yourself up on Twitter is to follow the different types of brands, people, hashtags, and things like that, just to see how those conversations are being had. Instagram is another great place to see what's trending and the type of visuals and content that are resonating with people. I regularly go through hashtags just to see what are those top conversations that are being had, or what's what virality different content has. Again, this really kind of depends on your audience and where they're living, but Twitter and Instagram are my go-tos, and Facebook is a really good place to go if you want to look through groups. A lot of different industries or companies or creators spend a lot of time on different Facebook groups having conversations, and so that's a good place to start if you just want to see what people are talking about or what their pain points are, or the resources that they're looking for. So Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram are my top 3. Honorable mention to LinkedIn, because that's another great place where people are having conversations about their industries.